Hey guys, tonight we ease into a place that feels both ancient and oddly familiar. Imagine a chill stone corridor, echoing with the soft shuffle of sandals, the smell of damp limestone, and a faint glow dancing against the walls. You're not in a modern city or even a cozy medieval cottage, you're in a monastery. Where silence isn't just golden, it's the house rule. The only thing louder than the hush of prayer is the steady drip of wax as it trickles down a taper. You probably won't survive this lifestyle. No Netflix, no Wi-Fi, no coffee machines humming at 2 a.m., just you, a candle, and a long line of chanting monks. A rhythm so slow, so methodical, it could lull even the most caffeinated modern soul straight to sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The monastery morning begins before the sun even dares to stretch. You hear a faint bell, but it isn't the only keeper of time. More important than bells, in fact, is the candle. A monk leans over in the chapel, eyes adjusting to flickers of waxy light. He strikes a spark, lights the first taper, and just like that, the day begins. The candle isn't there just for ambiance. No, it's a clock. Each stick of beeswax is carefully measured, marked, and blessed, and as it melts, so does the morning. You can almost picture it, a narrow strip scratched into the wax, like a medieval version of a smartphone timer. And when the wax dribbles past that mark, time to pray. The mainstream fact here: monasteries did indeed keep time through candles marked at intervals. It was practical, portable, and surprisingly precise, at least in wind-free rooms. That candle slowly became the heartbeat of the cloister, melting away minutes for prayers called matins, lauds, and prime. But there's also a quirky tidbit. Some monasteries supposedly flavored their wax with herbs. So as it burned, the air smelled faintly of rosemary or lavender. Imagine a timed aromatherapy diffuser. 12th century edition. It's the kind of detail that makes you both smile and feel a little envious. Scented candles really aren't new at all. As you wander the cloister, you notice the walls are lined with shadows that quiver with each flicker. The candle doesn't just tell time, it paints time. The lengthening shadow marks not only the hours but the soul's progress through the day. Historians still argue whether monks really relied solely on candle time or whether it was more symbolic, layered with ritual meaning. Maybe it was both, maybe it didn't matter. The early morning prayers flow, low and murmuring, like a river of whispers. You sit on a cold bench, shoulders wrapped in wool, listening to the choir rise and fall. The candle sputters once, a tiny rebellion against routine. You can't help but smirk. Even wax gets tired of schedules. Some monks, especially the novices, would stare at the wax like modern students sneak glances at clocks during lectures. Is it time yet? Their eyes silently beg. And when the flame eats its way down to the next scratch, the relief is almost comic. Prayer break over. Move on. Time waits for no one. Except, apparently, for a half-burned candle. You feel the monastery morning stretch. Not in speed but in depth. There's no rush here. Just a slow, steady pace dictated by melting wax and humming voices. Your own heartbeat begins to sync with it, slower, softer, steadier. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the drip of wax falling onto a wooden tray. A sound so faint you'd miss it unless the world around you was perfectly still. And here it is. No carts rattling by, no gossiping neighbors, just the occasional cough of a monk who maybe should have worn thicker wool. By the time the candle burns down to its next mark, you've traveled half a morning without realizing it. That's the strange gift of this place. In a world without clocks or alarms, time doesn't just pass, it melts. The wax you saw flickering in that dim chapel wasn't just any old lump of fat shoved onto a string. No, medieval monks treated the crafting of these time candles as an act of devotion. You imagine stepping into the little workshop tucked behind the cloister wall, stone floor dusted with flecks of wax. Benches scarred by knives, the faint hum of bees lingering in the air like an echo of summer. Here, the process begins. First, they melt down the beeswax. The golden liquid, warm and thick, is poured carefully, as if each drop holds a prayer. Beeswax is prized, it burns clean, with hardly any smoke, and carries the faint sweetness of wildflowers. Poorer monasteries sometimes made do with tallow candles, thick and greasy, stinking faintly of sheep fat. But if you were lucky enough to be in a wealthy abbey, beeswax it was. Your nose thanks you. The wicks were lengths of flax, twisted and dried, dipped again and again into vats until coated in layers of wax. Each dip added another minute to the clock. You picture monks moving in quiet rhythm, dipping, lifting, cooling, dipping again. It's repetitive, but soothing. The sort of task you could easily fall into a trance doing. Much like scrolling on your phone late at night. Except, slightly more useful. Now comes the clever bit. Once the candle was thick enough, they marked it, notched lines cut into the side at regular intervals, each representing a fixed slice of time. Some monasteries carved 12 marks, some 24, depending on how finely they wanted to slice the hours. Occasionally, they pressed in little metal pins at each mark. As the wax melted, the pin would fall out with a faint clink, alerting the sacristan that the hour had passed. Imagine it as the medieval version of a notification ping, only gentler and much less anxiety-inducing. The mainstream historical fact here is simple. Written records survive that describe candles measured into units of time. Monks didn't just invent this, they inherited and refined it. The candle clock was a known device in both Europe and China centuries earlier. But in monasteries, it became a spiritual metronome. But then comes the quirky tidbit. Some chroniclers mention candles that burned with colored sections, layers of dyed wax stacked like a sleepy rainbow. As each hue disappeared, it signaled a change of prayer or task. Can you imagine it? A liturgical mood ring, except it melts. Historians still argue whether these candles were truly standardized instruments or more symbolic. Ritual objects. Did monks really depend on the drip of wax alone? Or did they treat it as one of many signs, the bells? The sun's position. The bodily rhythm of hunger and drowsiness? The truth probably flickers somewhere in between. Picture yourself standing near one of these newly made candles. Its surface smooth, faintly warm from the craftsman's hand. The monk scratches his last mark, whispers a blessing, and sets it aside to harden. There's something serene about the patience involved. No rush, no assembly line, just faith that time will pass as it always does. Steadily, if you're willing to watch. Meanwhile, a novice is assigned to guard the candles. Imagine being that unlucky guy, spending your early years not in prayerful study but in scraping wax and trimming wicks. He probably complained in silence, much like interns today making endless photocopies. But someone had to do it. Without those candles, the entire monastery would drift, unmoored in darkness. The candles also had to be stored carefully. Too warm, and they sagged like tired noodles. Too cold, and they cracked. Monasteries sometimes had little wax rooms, cool and dry, filled with the faint scent of bees. You walk into one and the air feels oddly heavy, thick with stored summers. Thousands of tiny wings once labored in fields of clover just so monks could measure a single night of prayer. And when the candle was finally lit in service, it became more than a tool. The flame was symbolic, the light of Christ, the illumination of knowledge, the fragile thread of human life. But it was also practical, a ruler of hours, quietly shrinking with each passing prayer. You catch yourself staring too long at it, hypnotized by the wobble of light. That's the thing about candles. They pull you in, the way an open fire does. You lose time while measuring time, which feels like a neat little irony. The monks might have chuckled at that, though, chuckle, for them probably looked more like the tiniest twitch of the lips before going back to solemn chanting. Still, you can imagine a sleepy brother leaning over to his neighbor during crafting hours. Bet mine burns straighter than yours. And so the time candle is born, not merely a lump of wax, but a handmade clock, a spiritual companion. and a reminder that even something as ordinary as melting wax can guide centuries of prayer. The candle is made, the marks are carved, and now the true rhythm of the monastery hums into being. You settle onto a cold wooden bench, the smell of beeswax drifting lazily through the chapel, while a line of monks begins to chant. Their voices roll like distant waves, low and steady, and each flicker of the candle marks where you are in this sea of sound. The monk's entire schedule, hours upon hours of prayers, meals, work, and even naps, is bound to the slow drip of wax. It's not about productivity like modern office planners, it's about devotion. Spacing out each sacred act so no moment feels too rushed. You feel it yourself, that peculiar calm that comes from surrendering your calendar to a flame. No beeping alarms, no blinking notifications, just melt, drip, flicker, pray. The mainstream historical fact here is that monasteries were governed by the divine office, also known as the liturgy of the hours. 7 times a day, and often once in the middle of the night, the monks gathered to sing psalms and chant prayers. Those moments were spaced apart by careful timekeeping, and candles became one of the most trusted guides. But then comes a quirky detail. Some monks reportedly counted prayers not only by verses but by the way wax dripped. If a candle ran too quickly, prayers got shorter. If it burned slowly, well, good luck to your knees. Imagine today's fitness app suddenly deciding your jog needs to be 10 minutes longer because your phone glitched. That was their version of an accidental overtime shift. And it wasn't just about the flame. You notice the monk's eyes dart occasionally to the side of the candle, checking whether the wax has reached the next notch. A little like kids in a classroom sneaking glances at the wall clock. Except here the class is divine chanting, and the teacher is, well, God. Talk about pressure. Historians still argue whether this ritual reliance on candles was more symbolic than practical. Some believe the monks had other cues, the position of the sun through stained glass windows, or even the toll of bells set by the abbot's judgment. Yet, the records are clear. In drafty or dark places, candles were the monks' closest allies. You can almost feel the tension. Imagine a novice given the job of watching the candle, tasked with signaling the end of each chant. If he nodded off, the whole rhythm collapsed. One wrong blink and suddenly Matins runs into Lauds, and breakfast gets delayed. You don't want to be that guy. The chants themselves blend into the flickering time. You hear words rise and fall, Latin syllables curling through the air like smoke. The candle glows, shadows sway, and the wax creeps lower. Your breathing falls into the same cadence, slow and heavy, like you're being sung to sleep. And then, quirk number 2, the monks sometimes used 2 candles to make sure the timing was correct. If one burned faster than the other, they had to stop and figure out why. Was the wick too thick? Was there a hidden draft? It must have been like comparing 2 phone clocks and realizing one is off by a few minutes. Except this wasn't about missing a train, it was about possibly angering the Almighty. The candle sputters. A tiny drip of wax slides down and lands with a soft hiss on a metal tray. You almost jump. It feels louder than it should in this silence. The monk nearest you doesn't flinch. He's used to this. For him, the drip is a punctuation mark, not a distraction. For you, it's oddly comforting, like a metronome reminding you that the world is still ticking along. A sly thought slips in. The monks must have had favorite candles. The ones that burned evenly and reliably. And probably a few they dreaded, the lopsided, smoky troublemakers. You imagine Brother Thomas sighing when he sees the crooked candle lit for the vigil. Ah, there goes my evening. Yet the rhythm persists. Wax melts. Chants rise. Your eyelids grow heavier. And just when you think nothing has changed, you glance again and realize the candle has already passed another mark. Time has slipped away, quietly, the way sleep creeps in when you least notice. The beauty of it is in its simplicity. Life measured not by minutes and seconds, but by glow and shadow, by drip and silence. You might even feel tempted to try it yourself. Light a candle, carve a few lines, and let it guide your evening. Just don't tell your phone. It might get jealous. By now, you've probably noticed that a candle isn't the only way humans have tried to tame the slippery thing we call time. In fact, the monks knew about other devices, and sometimes even experimented with them. But somehow, the candle remained their trusty favorite, simple, steady, and glowing in the dark when other options fell flat. Imagine stepping outside the monastery walls for a moment. In the courtyard, you spot a sundial, a flat stone with carved lines, a shadow creeping slowly across its face. It looks impressive, until you remember. Sundials are utterly useless when it's cloudy, or when it's night, or, when you happen to live in Northern Europe where sunshine is as rare as polite YouTube comments. Suddenly, the candle seems like the smarter bet. There were also water clocks, known as clepsydras. Picture a ceramic pot with a tiny hole at the bottom. Water trickles out drop by drop, measuring time with liquid patience. The Greeks loved them, the Romans used them in courts, and some monasteries experimented with them too. The mainstream fact is that water clocks were known in Europe long before mechanical clocks arrived. But their problem? Water freezes in winter, grows algae in summer, and frankly makes a mess on the stone floor. You wouldn't want to mop that at 3 a.m. between matins and lauds. The quirky tidbit here is that some water clocks were designed to whistle as they emptied, tiny flutes built into the vessel so the monks got a soft piping sound when the hour had passed. Imagine a candle quietly dripping next to a pot that randomly toots. It's basically the medieval version of a roommate playing the recorder in the middle of the night. And then there were hourglasses. Though those were rarer in the earlier Middle Ages, sand was harder to measure consistently, and good luck making glass that didn't crack in a drafty cloister. Still, a few abbots imported them from far-off markets, showing them off like tech enthusiasts flaunting the newest smartphone. And of course, the monks would nod politely, then keep using candles anyway. Reliable, warm, symbolic. Historians still argue whether candles were truly more accurate than water clocks. Some claim the wax burned unevenly, making them unreliable. Others counter that at least a candle didn't freeze solid. The debate flickers on, much like the flames themselves. You return to the chapel and notice the candle glowing steadily, while outside, the sundial sits in useless darkness. The monks don't worry. They know which device keeps their rhythm through foggy nights. Still, it's not hard to picture an abbot boasting, "Our monastery has both a candle clock and a water clock," as if flaunting dual monitors at a medieval office desk. Of course, not every monk trusted the technology. Some preferred to go by instinct, measuring time by how hungry they felt or how stiff their knees got during prayer. It's the ancient equivalent of saying, "I don't need a watch. I can feel when it's lunchtime," which works fine until you realize monks fasted regularly and hunger wasn't exactly reliable. There's a certain comfort in knowing that even in the 12th century, people were already arguing about the best way to tell time. Some things never change. Today we debate digital versus analog. They debated wax versus water. Picture it. Two monks leaning against a cloister wall, one swearing by his candle, the other defending his dripping pot of water. A heated debate, delivered in whispers because, of course, silence was still a rule. Meanwhile, the abbot sighs and mutters, "Boys, just pray." The candle, steady and warm, wins you over easily. It doesn't whistle like a water clock or vanish like a shadow on a cloudy day. It just melts, quietly, patiently, reminding you that time is softer than we pretend. You start to feel yourself melt into it. 2. The wax has burned down a notch, and now you drift deeper into the monastery's day. You don't get to just sit around watching candles here. Every flicker means another task. The monks have carved their hours into blocks, and each one is filled with quiet, repetitive rhythms. It's like a schedule planner, but instead of notifications popping on your phone, the reminder is a shadow crawling across stone walls. The day begins with prime, one of the morning prayer hours. You shuffle from the chapel to the cloister walk, the air crisp with dew seeping in through narrow windows. The stone under your sandals is cold enough to wake you up faster than any espresso shot. You feel the faint warmth of candlelight clinging to you, a portable sunrise carried from the chapel into the heart of the cloister. After prayer, work begins. Monks don't just kneel all day, they dig, plant, cook, clean, and copy. Each job flows from candlemark to candlemark. A monk digging in the herb garden knows when to stop, not because his back gives out but because the sacristan has announced another wax milestone. It's almost comical to imagine him leaning on his spade, squinting back toward the chapel door like a kid asking, "Are we done yet?" The mainstream fact here is that monastic life followed the rule of Saint Benedict, which emphasized a balance of prayer, study, and manual labor. Time was divided carefully so that no one part of life overshadowed the others. The candle kept that rhythm alive, reminding everyone that even weeding carrots could be holy work if done in the right hour. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some abbeys apparently had candles specifically assigned to different chores. A thick one for prayer, a skinny one for scriptorium work, and even stubbier ones to measure cooking times. You picture a monk stirring a cauldron of lentil stew, squinting at the candle by the hearth. "Brother, the peas aren't done yet, it's only halfway melted." That's medieval MasterChef timing. Historians still argue whether daily schedules were truly that strict or if monks had more leeway. Was every spoonful of gruel and every stroke of a quill really dictated by candle marks? Or did they rely more on the abbot's intuition? Perhaps the answer lies in the balance. Candles gave structure, but human judgment filled in the gaps. You wander into the refectory, the dining hall, where lunch unfolds in silence. Bowls of vegetables, bread, maybe a bit of cheese if the abbey is well supplied. No talking aloud, only the faint drip of candle wax beside the reader's lectern. One monk reads scripture aloud while the others chew quietly, time sliding forward with each softened syllable. It feels both strict and strangely peaceful. After the meal, there's more work. Mending robes, carving wood, tending to bees that will one day gift their wax back to the community. The rhythm is slow, deliberate, repetitive. You notice that the candle doesn't just mark the time, it sets the mood. Shadows stretch and soften, and before long, you're lulled into the sense that the whole world is paced by wax. And yes, there's humor here too. Imagine Brother Matthew assigned to laundry duty. He watches the candle anxiously, hoping the wax burns faster so he can stop scrubbing tunics in freezing water. You can almost hear him whisper, "Lord, let this candle hurry up." It's the eternal prayer of the overworked. By the time the afternoon arrives, you've moved through chores, prayers, and a silent meal, all without the shrill intrusion of modern clocks. And strangely, it doesn't feel oppressive, it feels freeing. Your mind no longer nags about minutes or deadlines. Instead, you flow with the flame. The wax dips lower, the shadows lengthen, another prayer is called, and you realize, in this cloister, the candle isn't just measuring time, it's teaching you how to live inside it. The sun has dipped low enough that daylight struggles to reach through the narrow windows. And now the monastery shifts into a deeper quiet. You trail behind the brothers as they shuffle toward the chapel for night vigils. This is the hour when silence thickens, when even the walls seem to listen. A single candle flares in the center of the altar, and its glow paints every hooded face with a softness that makes the monks look half asleep already. The vigil is long, stretching into midnight. You try to keep your eyes open, but the rhythm of chanting mixes with the faint hiss of wax, and your head nods dangerously. The monks are trained for this. For you, it feels like spiritual jet lag. No matter how hard you try to stay alert, the combination of flickering shadows and low voices is basically divine ASMR. The mainstream historical fact here, night vigils, often called matins, were a core part of monastic life. Monks rose in the darkness to pray, seeing it as a way to imitate Christ's own long nights of devotion. Some communities gathered at midnight, others closer to 2 a.m. But the principle was the same: wake up when the world is sleeping, and hold a candle to the night. The quirky tidbit: some abbeys apparently used giant candles that burned all night. Their wax measured in thick segments. One description claims these candles were taller than a man, set in great iron holders, so the sacristan had to climb a ladder to mark them. Imagine being the poor monk assigned to wax duty, lugging a candle the size of a telephone pole into the chapel. If that doesn't wake you up, nothing will. Historians still argue whether these vigils were strictly observed in every monastery. Some sources suggest monks sometimes dozed off in corners, while others hint that the rules were enforced with strict discipline. Perhaps, like modern gym memberships, the ideal was firmer than the practice. You glance at the candle. The shadows it casts ripple like water across the stone columns. The monks' voices rise and fall, weaving a soundscape so steady you could fall asleep sitting up. And some of them do. Heads lolling forward, jerking awake just in time to mumble the next song. You can't help but smile. Devotion may be eternal, but eyelids are weak. The midnight air is chill, your breath faintly visible. The candle's warmth is small, but it feels monumental against the vast darkness pressing at the windows. Each notch the flame passes is like a checkpoint, carrying the monks closer to dawn. Without it, the night would stretch endlessly, a black sea with no shore. With it, the vigil has a heartbeat. And yes, even here, humor sneaks in. Imagine Brother Peter, famous for snoring during vigils. Every time he nodded off, the sound of his rumble competed with the Gregorian chant. Eventually, the abbot placed him closest to the candle, hoping the heat would keep him awake. You can't help but think of modern office workers placed right under the air vent so they won't nap on the job. Some struggles are timeless. As the vigil wears on, you feel yourself sinking deeper into the rhythm. The chants become waves, the candle a lighthouse. Each flicker of flame is both a marker of time and a gentle reminder that dawn is inching closer. By the time the final psalm fades, the wax has burned through another section, and the monks shuffle out, yawning discreetly, preparing to rest a little before dawn prayers begin again. You linger a moment longer, staring at the stub of candle still glowing bravely. It's weary but unwavering, and in that tired flame, you sense what the monks sought all along, a fragile light that stands against the endless night. As dawn creeps in again, the monastery wakes to a different layer of candlelight, one less about schedules and more about atmosphere. You notice it immediately when you step into the cloister corridors. The smell, not the heavy tang of tallow, thank goodness, but the gentler perfume of beeswax. It hangs in the air like a quiet comfort, faintly sweet, like honey baked into bread. It's subtle, but once you notice, you can't ignore it. The monastery doesn't just look like candlelight, it smells like it too. The mainstream historical fact: beeswax candles were highly prized because they burned cleanly, with little smoke, and filled the air with a soft, sweet scent. In contrast, tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, smoked, sputtered, and left an unmistakably meaty odor. Monks who could afford beeswax rejoiced in the difference. You, for one, are very grateful to be in one of those wealthier cloisters. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some chronicles suggest that candles made from beeswax carried the smell of the flowers the bees had visited. Clover, lavender, wild thyme, tiny echoes of summer fields drifting through the cloister even in the bleakest winter months. Imagine praying at midnight while faint lavender notes curl through the air. It's like a medieval version of an aromatherapy candle, though the monks would insist it was entirely holy and not at all indulgent. Historians still argue whether this was actually noticeable or just poetic imagination. Could the human nose really detect which flower made the wax? Or did monks simply want to believe their candles carried traces of paradise? Either way, the belief itself gave meaning to the flame. It isn't just the smell, either. You begin to hear the candles if you pay attention. A faint hiss when a droplet hits the holder. A soft pop when a trapped bubble of air bursts in the wick. The occasional sputter as if the flame is clearing its throat. In the deep silence of a monastery, these sounds become oddly loud, almost conversational. You can picture a tired novice jolting awake during night prayers, swearing the candle actually spoke to him. And then there's the texture. Step into the scriptorium during a quiet hour and you'll see drips hardened into wax stalactites, clinging to brass holders like frozen waterfalls. The monks scrape them off later, recycle them, melt them back into usefulness. Nothing is wasted. Even here, the candle is part of an eternal cycle. Wax melts, drips, hardens, melts again. A stray thought tickles you. The monastery must have had that one monk obsessed with trimming wicks. The perfectionist who couldn't stand a smoky flame. You imagine him striding around with little scissors, snipping every wick to just the right length, sighing dramatically if anyone dared to let theirs burn unevenly. Medieval candle police. The atmosphere these little details create is unlike anything modern lights can offer. A bulb simply flips on. A candle grows, shifts, flickers, lives. Shadows play across the walls, stretching like dancers in slow motion. The monks don't need wall art. Every stone surface becomes a canvas for flame. And you start to see how a simple act of measuring time also filled every sense. The eyes, the nose, the ears, even the texture under your fingertips. The day rolls forward, candle by candle, drip by drip. The scents mix with the echoes of chance. And you begin to realize that time here isn't just something you count. It's something you breathe, something you smell, something you hear in the faint crackle as the wick folds into ash. You slip quietly into the scriptorium, where monks bend over parchment like human cranes, their long necks craning forward, quills scratching in faintly desperate rhythm. The glow here is all candlelight, steady, pale circles of beeswax flame arranged to avoid dripping on precious pages. It smells faintly of ink, damp stone, and the sweet resin of wax. If the monastery had a heartbeat, this would be it. The mainstream historical fact here is unavoidable. Without candlelight, most medieval manuscripts wouldn't exist. Scribes labored for hours, copying texts by hand, and candles provided the necessary glow after sunset or on bleak, gray days. It's not exaggeration to say European learning itself flickered in waxy flames. The quirky tidbit: some manuscripts still carry actual evidence of those long nights. A few surviving codices show faint drips of candle wax hardened onto the page margins. Imagine a monk leaning too far forward, or a careless elbow bumping a stand. That drip is still there, centuries later, a kind of medieval sticky note reminding you, yes, a human being struggled through this very copy, maybe fighting sleep while the candle leaned a little too close. And of course, historians still argue whether scribes preferred dim light because it reduced glare, or whether they cursed every evening when their eyes ached from squinting. Some scholars say monks deliberately restricted themselves to daylight for most tasks, while others insist candlelit copying was essential for productivity. The debate continues, though the wax stains themselves seem to vote for the latter. It's not just manuscripts, either. Candles shape ritual in the scriptorium. Before a monk even starts, he might whisper a prayer, strike flint, and light a wick as though calling the words themselves into being. The candle isn't just illumination, it's a companion, a witness, maybe even a collaborator. You can almost imagine it grumbling. Another psalm? Really? Didn't we do that one yesterday? As it sputters in protest. The atmosphere is hypnotic. Dozens of tiny flames flicker, each one shifting just slightly, so shadows ripple across the walls like black waves. Every quill scratch seems amplified by the silence. And the smell: warm parchment, ink made of oak galls, wax drifting sweet in the air. You can feel your shoulders relax, even though you're hunched over like the others. Now picture the rhythm. Wax drips, quill scratches, wax drips again. The candle doesn't just measure time in hours, it measures sentences. A monk might think, I can finish one more psalm before that candle gutter out. That's how you mark progress in a world without blinking clocks or flashing notifications. It's soothing in its simplicity, even if your neck aches. And yes, accidents happen. A sudden breeze through a drafty window might snuff half the room in an instant. Total darkness. A muffled groan ripples through the benches. Someone curses softly in Latin, which sounds way more dignified than English. And the race to relight begins. Sparks fly from flint, wax smokes, flames leap back to life, and you can practically hear the collective sigh of relief. You can't help smiling. This entire monastery is one long game of don't let the flame go out. It's cozy, frustrating, sacred, and absurd all at once. And as you sit there, eyes heavy, watching a bead of wax slide down like a sleepy tear, you realize how many of the world's great texts were rescued from the dark by nothing more than stubborn monks and a lump of beeswax. The candle measures time, yes, but it also measures patience, endurance, and sheer human stubbornness to keep writing even when your only light is sputtering like it's about to give up. The bell rings, echoing through stone like a reminder that even candles don't burn forever. You shuffle with the other monks into the chapel, where night prayers are held. The space is cool, vast, and surprisingly bare, no stained glass yet, just tall arches swallowing sound. But what the chapel does have is candles. Dozens, hundreds, perhaps. arranged like an army of flames standing to attention. Here lies the mainstream historical fact: in medieval monasteries, liturgy was inseparable from candlelight. The flame wasn't just practical, it was sacred, symbolizing Christ as the light of the world. Monks often believed their prayers rose heavenward on the very smoke of the burning wax. The act of lighting was itself a ritual, as important as the chant it accompanied. The quirky tidbit: certain feasts demanded extra candles, not merely for visibility but as a show of devotion. Records mention altars blazing so brightly that people joke you could read from the far end of the cloister. And yes, there are whispers of competitive monks who may have added just one more candle to outshine their brothers, an ancient arms race in flame. Historians still argue whether the abundance of candles in chapels reflected deep theology or just social expectation. Was it about glorifying God through brightness? Or was it about monasteries flexing wealth by showing off their beeswax reserves? The debate smolders like a half-melted wick. You sit in a pew as chants begin, the Latin syllables rolling slow and deep, echoing through stone ribs overhead. The candles turn the chapel into a breathing thing. Every flame flickers in time with the draft. Shadows sliding like unseen monks pacing the walls. The smell is almost overwhelming. Waves of warm wax and a faint tang of smoke. You find yourself breathing slower, as though syncing with the room itself. And the sensory detail continues. The heat of so many flames radiates outward, taking the chill off the stone. A bead of sweat trails down your temple, not because of prayerful intensity but because the chapel has effectively become a medieval sauna. Somewhere in the choir, you suspect, a novice is regretting his choice of wool habit. In this atmosphere, time isn't marked by clocks but by chant verses and the shrinking length of candles. You watch one flame gutter briefly, recover, then continue its slow march toward wax oblivion. That single candle seems oddly like you, fighting fatigue, swaying but refusing to go out. You can't help thinking about the practical side, though. Who replaces all these candles? Somewhere behind the scenes, another monk is hauling boxes of beeswax like a medieval roadie, ready to swap in fresh tapers before the crowd notices. The divine might be eternal, but candle wax definitely isn't. There's a quiet comfort here. The chant drones on, the flames dance, and your mind begins to drift. This chapel is less about prayer and more about atmosphere. Less about theology and more about the sensory experience of warmth, sound, and light. You close your eyes for just a moment. When you open them again, the candles seem to blur together. A river of tiny suns leading straight to the altar. You exhale, knowing that this ritual isn't meant to hurry time along, it's meant to stretch it. Soften it. Bathe it in flickering gold until even sleepless nights feel like they've passed in peace. The service ends, and the chapel slowly empties. But not every monk heads to bed. A handful remain behind to tend to the altar candles, replacing the half-burned stubs, scraping wax from brass holders, and setting fresh wicks for the next round of prayer. It's not glamorous work, but here's the secret. These monks are the unsung heroes of timekeeping. The mainstream historical fact is clear: monasteries required entire teams of candlekeepers, often novices, who handled the constant cycle of preparation. Candles had to be trimmed, remolded, and carefully rationed so the stockpile lasted through long winters. You can't just let the supply run out when your entire timekeeping system is built on melting wax. The quirky tidbit? In some places, special wooden measuring sticks existed. Think of them as medieval candle rulers, used to ensure each taper was the exact right length for the ritual it served. Too short, and the prayers might finish in awkward darkness. Too long, and you wasted expensive wax. Somewhere, a frustrated novice probably spent an entire evening filing a candle down by half an inch while muttering unholy things under his breath. Historians still argue whether monasteries had centralized candlemasters who oversaw the whole operation, or if the task rotated as a humble duty shared among novices. Was this seen as spiritual service, or just chores? The truth is hazy, like smoke curling from a dying wick. You wander past the storerooms, where shelves groan under neat stacks of beeswax cylinders. The air is dense with sweetness, almost like a pastry kitchen. Imagine stepping in here hungry. You'd be tempted to nibble a candle, only to regret it instantly. Yes, People tried. No. Beeswax doesn't taste like honey. The work doesn't stop with storage. By the light of a single taper, you watch as melted scraps are poured into molds, recycled into fresh candles. It's a cycle as endless as prayer itself. Wax burns, drips, hardens, melts again, returns to flame. There's a strange satisfaction in it, like time folding back on itself. Each generation of candle carrying a little trace of its ancestors. And here's where you notice something. The act of maintaining candles isn't just labor, it's meditation. Imagine spending hours scraping hardened wax. Your motions steady, your thoughts drifting into prayer or daydream. You'd lose yourself in repetition. The way modern people lose themselves scrolling on their phones. Only here, the only glow comes from the wick you just trimmed. The monastery lives and breathes by these tasks. Without them, the chants, the prayers, the reading, even the very rhythm of daily life would collapse. The monks may not talk about their candlework in sermons, but deep down, they know it. No wax, no time. And as you watch a fresh taper being placed carefully into its brass stand, you realize you're seeing something both profoundly humble and quietly cosmic. A monk's sweaty hand, a lump of wax, a flick of flint, and suddenly time itself is reborn, measured once again by the gentle climb of flame. Night folds itself over the monastery again, heavy and quiet, but this time you notice something different. Not every monk is asleep. A few slip into the library, guided by the glow of a single taper, to study or write when the rest of the world has gone dark. This is the monastery's true secret. Candlelight extends the day, stretching human activity into hours that otherwise would have been swallowed by shadow. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Monasteries were among the rare medieval places where artificial light was consistently available after sunset. Outside, peasants usually had little more than a fire in the hearth. But here, by virtue of wax and discipline, monks carved out time for reading, prayer, and thought long past sundown. Without candles, much of Europe would have gone to bed with the chickens. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some scholars note that candlelight shaped how people thought. Dim, flickering light forced slower reading, slower writing. Ideas unfolded at a candle's pace, measured in drips and sputters rather than in bursts of speed. Some even suggest that candlelit nights encouraged a dreamlike, almost meditative style of thought, half between waking and sleeping, which might explain why some medieval theological texts read like fever dreams. And of course, historians still argue whether monks genuinely preferred these late hours or simply endured them. Were they voluntarily nocturnal scholars, or unwilling insomniacs compelled by strict schedules? Did candlelight inspire creativity, or just eye strain? The debates flicker endlessly, like the flames themselves. The atmosphere in the library is entrancing. Shadows lean across shelves, long fingers stretching between spines of vellum-bound books. The flame breathes, throwing gold onto pages, making the black ink shimmer like liquid. Every time the candle gutters, words seem to vanish, only to return in the next breath of light. You sit with a book before you and realize how fragile knowledge feels here. One blown-out wick, and entire worlds disappear into darkness. It strikes you, too, that this glow isn't neutral. Candlelight warms parchment, makes illustrations glow, renders saints' faces almost alive in the margins. Text itself becomes performance, shimmering in and out like whispered secrets. You begin to suspect monks didn't just read by candlelight, they believed differently because of it. Of course, there are hazards. Wax drips into bindings, sparks blacken corners, a clumsy elbow can topple flame into dry parchment. You imagine the panic of a novice knocking over a taper and nearly torching centuries of collected learning. Somewhere, an abbot probably invented the medieval equivalent of no food or drink in the library, just for candles. Still, the library breathes with its flames. It is alive because of them. You lean closer, tracing the margin where a tiny sketch of a rabbit peers out. Drawn by some bored scribe, the candlelight makes its ink ears twitch, as though it might scamper away if the wick burns any lower. And then the thought dawns. By candlelight, monks weren't just copying texts. They were living in an altered state of perception. Their world slowed, blurred, softened by flame. You are, too. Your eyelids droop. Your mind wanders. and time itself begins to dissolve. As if you're floating not in hours or minutes but in wax and smoke and the soft glow of a world written at the speed of a flickering wick. By now, you've realized something important. Candles don't just mark time in the monastery, they actually shape it. The monk's entire schedule bends around how wax behaves. You sense it most clearly in the long, silent hours between midnight and dawn, when every flame is a fragile promise against the dark. The mainstream historical fact: monasteries practiced what was known as the liturgy of the hours, a cycle of prayers at fixed times throughout the day and night. Without clocks, candles became one of the simplest, most reliable tools to measure these intervals. Light a candle of known length, and when it's gone, you know it's time to rise, chant, or change duties. The quirky tidbit: in some abbeys, special, notched candles existed, designed with little metal balls embedded at intervals. As the wax melted, a ball would fall out with a ping into a dish below, announcing the passage of time. Imagine being woken not by an alarm clock but by a tiny medieval plinko machine. Irritating? Probably. Effective? Definitely. Historians still argue whether these notched candles were common or rare curiosities. Some claim they were widespread in wealthier monasteries. Others think they were more experimental than practical. The truth remains as slippery as hot wax on stone floors. You notice how the monk's perception of time isn't mechanical. There are no minutes or seconds. Time is thick, soft, measured by burning matter and falling balls, by chanting voices and drowsy silences. It's not something you chase, it's something that melts away in front of you. And here's the funny part: you, too, start thinking in wax lengths. I'll rest until this taper reaches halfway. I'll finish this thought before that drip hardens. It's strangely comforting. There's no rush, no countdown clock, only the gentle, visible passage of flame. Of course, this system isn't flawless. Drafts can speed a candle. Damp air can slow it. A clumsy novice might bump the holder, throwing the whole schedule into chaos. One misplaced sneeze and suddenly Matins is 2 hours late. The monks, though, take this uncertainty in stride. For them, time itself is flexible, fluid, always subject to the whims of fire. And maybe that's why life here feels so oddly peaceful. Instead of marching to a tick-tock drumbeat, you drift with the flame, sliding through tasks as wax shrinks and shadows grow. You don't measure your work by how much you get done, only by how steadily you move with the candle's rhythm. Lying on your straw mattress, you watch a single taper across the room. Its flame sways, grows, shrinks, bends in the draft. You realize you're sinking your breath to it, inhaling as the flame leans tall, exhaling as it bows. Before long, you're not even sure where you end and the candle begins. You're both just small fires in the dark, keeping time together, burning slowly toward morning. Morning drizzles in pale and gray, but inside the monastery, candles are still doing their quiet work. You wander into the refectory where the monks eat, and you notice something peculiar. Candles here aren't just about telling time, they're about setting mood. 2. The mainstream historical fact: meals in monasteries were often eaten in silence, with a monk reading aloud from scripture or the lives of saints. The only sounds were the scrape of spoons, the faint shuffle of robes, and the low, steady voice of the reader. Candles provided the glow, making the refectory feel both solemn and oddly theatrical, like dinner and a stage play combined. Here's the quirky tidbit: some rules insisted that even during summer, when daylight was abundant, candles still had to be lit at meals. Why? Symbolism. The flame was a constant reminder of the divine presence, a quiet companion at the table. Imagine insisting on candlelight breakfast in July, sweating over porridge by a flame you don't technically need. That's dedication. Historians still argue whether this rule was universal or more of a local tradition. Did every monastery really burn precious wax year-round? Or were some abbots more pragmatic? The surviving accounts don't always agree, and the debate lingers like a half-snuffed wick. Sitting there, you notice how the flicker changes everything. Porridge looks almost luxurious when bathed in golden light. A chunk of bread seems noble, casting its own little shadow on the table. The monk reading aloud gains an aura of authority simply because the flame makes his face glow like a prophet's. The entire scene is transformed. not by the food, but by the candles. You can't help but imagine modern parallels. Dinner by LED light? Cold and sterile. Dinner by candlelight? Suddenly romantic. Or in this case, sacred. The monks may not think of it as ambience, but you feel it anyway. Every spoonful is slower, more mindful, as though the flame itself is nudging you. Eat gently. Breathe gently. Live gently. Of course, there are mishaps. A novice leans too far, and wax drips onto his sleeve. Another monk's taper sputters and goes out, leaving him half-shadowed like a medieval stage villain. You suppress a laugh, realizing these little accidents probably provided the only comic relief in otherwise silent meals. And maybe that's the point. Candles make the ordinary extraordinary. A dull breakfast becomes a ritual. A room of tired monks becomes a theater of light and shadow. And you, with your bowl of barley gruel, find yourself oddly grateful for the wax that makes this moment shimmer just a little brighter. By now, you've seen candles mark prayers, meals, work, and sleep, but there's another layer that lingers in the background, their role in memory itself. Monks didn't just measure time with candles, they remembered people, events, and hopes through flame. Here's the mainstream historical fact: candles were central to memorial rituals. A taper might be lit for the soul of a deceased brother, for a benefactor who donated land, or even for a saint whose feast was being celebrated. Each wick was a kind of living prayer, its steady burn a wordless petition. And the quirky tidbit: some records suggest monks believed candles could act almost like carriers of identity. A candle lit for a dead man was thought to burn with his time. As long as it glowed, it stood in for his presence, keeping him, quite literally, in the light. There's even one chronicle noting that when a candle sputtered unexpectedly during a memorial, the monks muttered nervously, as though the soul it represented had opinions about the ceremony. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or solemn theology. Did monks really think candles had personalities linked to the dead, or was it just poetic metaphor? The line blurs, as it often does in the Middle Ages, where ritual and belief wove tightly together like strands of wick. You see it clearly in the chapter house. Dozens of small flames flicker on a table, each one burning for someone no longer here. The light trembles, and the shadows stretch tall against the walls, as though those absent brothers have returned for a visit. You stand quietly, almost holding your breath, because the atmosphere is so thick it feels like you could scoop it up with your hands. And this is where candles bend time in an entirely different way. They don't just mark hours, they collapse centuries. A flame today connects to someone gone for decades. A pool of wax on the table becomes both a clock and a memory, both a tool and a prayer. Of course, you can't help imagining the lighter side. Somewhere in history, surely, a candle meant to honor an abbot burned out halfway through the service, leaving monks glancing nervously at each other, wondering if the wax had just delivered divine commentary. Still, you can't shake the feeling of tenderness in this ritual. The wax softens, the wick bows, the flame bends, and in those motions you sense remembrance itself, fragile, flickering, easily extinguished, yet stubborn enough to keep glowing through the draft. And as you step back from the table, you realize that in this monastery, candles aren't just tools of time. They're threads of memory, pulling the past into the present, one flicker at a time. The monastery is quiet again, but now you see candles differently. They aren't only wax and wick, not merely tools to mark when to pray or when to eat. They are the monastery's heartbeat, its pulse, its breath, its steady companion in every hour. And tonight, you catch the way they whisper about endings. 2. Here's the mainstream historical fact. Candles eventually became so entwined with timekeeping that even after mechanical clocks arrived, many monasteries kept using wax as a backup. In some places, candles were lit alongside clocks as a failsafe, a reminder that fire had measured time long before gears and bells took over. The quirky tidbit: one monastic record grumbles about a rebellious candle that refused to burn evenly, throwing off the schedule of prayers. Imagine blaming wax for making you late to work. And yet, you sympathize. You've seen how a draft or a lean can make a candle dance to its own rhythm. Time itself feels like it's swaying in that unpredictable flame. Historians still argue whether monks clung to candles out of tradition or necessity. Were they reluctant to trust early clocks? Or did they simply find something spiritually satisfying about wax? The truth, as usual, melts into both possibilities. You walk the cloisters one last time, passing niches where tiny flames glow like guardians. Shadows stretch and shrink around you, rippling across carved stone saints who seem almost alive in the flicker. You hear the faint hiss of wax dripping, the quiet pop of a wick folding in on itself. It's all so gentle, so rhythmic, like the monastery itself is exhaling. And in that moment, you realize something simple. Life here isn't ruled by minutes or seconds. It's guided by fire. The candle burns until it doesn't. And that is enough. You watch one last taper gutter, bow, and finally sigh into smoke. The air carries its sweetness, faint and lingering. The room grows darker, softer. You feel your own eyelids mimic the candle's bow, heavy and inevitable. And now, as the last candle fades, so too does the monastery grow still. The stone walls hold the warmth of the day. The chants echo only in memory. And the long waxy trails have hardened into quiet rivers across brass holders. The monks have retired to their cells, their breathing steady, their habits folded neatly, their prayers whispered one last time before dreams take over. You remain in the hush, watching the way darkness fills every corner. But it isn't a harsh darkness, it's velvet, soft, a blanket rather than a void. The absence of flame isn't frightening, it's simply restful. What the candle measured, it has already given. What time it marked has already passed. Now, there is only the gift of stillness. You picture the rhythm you followed, the drip of wax, the hum of chant, the glow of beeswax filling stone rooms. All of it has slowed your own pulse, guided your breathing into long, steady patterns. You are no longer rushing with clocks or worrying about alarms. You are part of this softer way of measuring life, where nothing is urgent, and everything simply flows. As you sink deeper into calm, let your thoughts drift like smoke. Let them coil upward, scatter, and vanish. Imagine the cool air of the cloister on your skin, the faint sweetness of beeswax in your nose, the steady hum of silence pressing gently at your ears. The monks are asleep, the candles are gone, and you, too, can let yourself fade into rest. Slowly, easily, quietly, your own flame bows low, then settles into peace. Good night. And may your dreams be as gentle as the last glow of wax.